I'm State Senator Nick Miller. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for joining us here. I want to thank the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission for hosting. Today we come together to talk about micromobility solutions, enforceable solutions. There's been a lot of challenges, not just in the Lehigh Valley or Delaware County, where my co-host Senator Carney's from, but across Pennsylvania. E-scooters, a number of different challenges, e-bikes, and quite frankly, way too many injuries and fatalities here in Allentown, motorcycles. So there's a lot to catch up on in terms of our laws and regulations here in Pennsylvania to make sure our Commonwealth is safe and making sure our pedestrians and riders are safe as well. I want to start off with some opening remarks from Senator Carney, and then we're going to hear from Becky Bradley via Zoom right afterwards. Senator Carney.
Thank you, Senator Miller. Good morning. I introduced Abby's Law, Senate Bill 1008, in honor of Abby Gillen, a charming and promising young girl from my district who tragically passed away last year after an e-scooter crash. On June 14th, Abby and her close friend, 11-year-old Bella Jones, were thrown from a single electric scooter into oncoming traffic as they entered the road from a sidewalk. Both girls were hospitalized, and Abby later passed away due to her injuries. Only 12 years old, devastating her community in Ridley Township and in Delaware County. After this tragedy, community members and leaders in my district rallied to call for e-scooter laws that will keep our kids safe, Abby's Law. Now, e-scooters are not defined in the vehicle code. They are not street legal devices. There's no law against using them on your private property. As battery technology has gotten better and cheaper since e-scooters first became a thing back in 2017, we've seen the price of e-scooters decrease significantly. You can buy them online or in store with ease. Parents are generally not aware that e-scooters are not legal to ride on sidewalks or streets. Retailers market e-scooters as a kid's toy. Walmart even lets you filter for teen, tween, child, and even toddler e-scooters. Meanwhile, at least 28 other states have passed e-scooter laws. And when you visit cities like Washington, D.C., it's common to see a shared scooter program. In this kind of environment, I can't blame parents for thinking it's okay to buy an e-scooter for a young adolescent. Many folks are alarmed at how quickly they become popular and believe we do need to do more to explicitly ban them and ramp up enforcement. The reality is that e-scooters are not going away, and we cannot put the proverbial toothpaste back in the tube. Thousands of people are riding them in mainly urban and suburban environments because they are useful and they're affordable. Interesting. But while they present an enticing commuting option to many, they are devices that come with certain risks, especially for children or when ridden recklessly. We need to find a way to provide for proper regulation for these devices. We figured out how to integrate bicycles into our communities. We've gotten e-bikes on the books too, though we know that they need some legislative attention. Abby's Law would set the rules for e-scooters. And those rules right now are you would need to be 16 to ride, the same age we allow people to drive a car, motorcycle, or e-bike. If you're 16 or 17, helmet use is mandatory. Only one person can ride a scooter at a time. 2 people on a single scooter is a recipe for disaster. A statewide e-scooter speed limit of 20 miles per hour max, just like the current maximum for e-bikes. You must follow the same rules of the road that the bicyclists must follow, including obeying all signs, yielding to pedestrians on the sidewalks every time, and using lights and reflectors at night. Our municipalities, our police departments, our neighbors, and the safety of our children desperately need clarity and leadership from the legislature in this issue. And Senate Democrats are actively listening and working on this. I'm looking forward to hearing from today's testifiers about this issue and their perspectives on how to make the best possible legislation in the months ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carney. And just a reminder, this hearing's, we're bringing together a number of different stakeholders, law enforcement, transportation advocates, other stakeholders to identify feedback on not just this legislation, but others. As we know, dirt bikes and ATVs, e-bikes. I mean, we're seeing the challenges in urban environments, suburban and rural as well. And so with that, I'd like to pass it over to Becky Bradley, the Executive Director of the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission. Becky, are you with us?
Yes, thank you, Senator Miller and Senator Carney and the Senate Democratic Policy Committee. I apologize that I can't be there today. I'm getting ready to go to a press conference with Governors Shapiro on a major manufacturing facility that's going to be announced here in just a few minutes. But thank you for holding your hearing at the LVPC. And I just wanted to start off with saying both Senate Bill 824 and 1008 go a long way to providing a framework that's going to make the Commonwealth safer, more accessible, and more resilient. Senator Kearney made the very important point that the toothpaste is out of the tube. And so how do we plan communities that support not only mobility for everyone, but safe mobility for everyone? And both of these bills take a great leap forward in achieving those goals. So as the Regional Planning Commission, as well as the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Lehigh Valley, the Planning Commission has to plan for the new and changing transportation modes and technologies. Our micromobility and pedestrian level transportation network is supported through partnerships with the Lehigh and Northampton Transportation Authority, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, the Link Trail Partners, Lehigh Valley Greenways, which is a Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources Conservation Landscape, who actually does a great deal to help support the connection between the on-road and the off-road system in partnership with us. We've convened, we've built consensus, we continue to work in implementation partnerships around key transportation issues. That includes our counties, our 62 local governments, our school districts, and advocacy partners, including AARP, the United Way of the Greater Lehigh Valley. I think you're going to hear from the Coalition for Appropriate Transportation a little bit later, and Community Bike Works. So together, we continue to collaborate on several plans and implementation partnerships and investments that will directly be shaped by the related Senate bills as they go forward and are implemented. So in 2021, we released an active transportation plan, Walk, Roll, LV, which serves as a foundation for many of our initiatives. And in 2024, we adopted a priority climate action plan for transportation decarbonization, which helps us address climate impacts on our transportation system, particularly air quality. Earlier this year, we published the Lehigh Valley Trail Connection Strategy, and I wanted to thank Evan Gardy, our Senior Transportation Planner, as well as Steve Weber, our Director of Transportation Planning. They help provide that comprehensive inventory of the region's trail infrastructure, along with Susan Myeroff, our Director of Environmental Planning, that helped identify critical gaps that need to be addressed to create that seamless network. So trails in general are protected bikeways. When you get onto the roadways, not so much in general. So looking ahead, our next major effort will be developing a Safe Streets for All plan, which just focuses on the transportation safety and interoperability between modes. All of these efforts are supported under the umbrella of our Bi-County Comprehensive Plan, Future LV. So throughout this work, pedestrian level and bike level and scooter level transportation remains a key thread connecting all these plans, partnerships, and relationships, our ongoing stakeholder relationships, and helps us partner with you at the Commonwealth. So for Senate Bill 824, with the increase in active and pedestrian level transportation modes since the pandemic, planners have focused on increasing infrastructure that supports them. As more people are walking, biking, using scooters and other mobility devices, including ADA accessibility devices, it's important to provide that safe, equitable, and sustainable option for infrastructure. Protected bike lanes and pedestrian plazas are among some of the most effective tools for creating safer, equitable, and accessible transportation networks, particularly in our suburban communities and our urban communities. So, as communities aim to improve their mobility options, help reduce crashes and incidents between different modes, support climate and public health goals, protected public spaces, the protected bikeways and pedestrian islands are several strong strategies which are supported by the Senate bill. Um, Parking protected bike lanes in particular, and is specifically noted in the bill, are inherently safer when rights of way allow for implementation. We don't always have the space for those facilities, but where we do, especially as we have greater and greater road widths and right of ways in our suburban communities, that will make bicycle accessibility even more important as our region grows. So by shifting parked cars away from the curb and placing cyclists in a protected space, the likelihood of crashes and other interactions with vehicles is reduced. They also improve comfort for riders who may be newer to biking or who feel unsafe in unprotected bike lanes like myself or on roads with shared lane markings only. So it's important to recognize that, again, street widths, land use, traffic volumes, curb use demands vary across places and corridors. So effective planning means choosing the right strategy for each location, mode, and infrastructure type. And the Senate bill goes a long way to do that. It's important to note that people today in the Lehigh Valley and actually all across the Commonwealth are using e-bikes, pedal bikes, traditional bikes. They're using scooters. They're using e-scooters. They're using jazzies and other sorts of ADA accessibility devices to do daily tasks, to get to school, to go to jobs, to go to doctor's appointments. And so accepting that now even our modes are becoming more diversified is a good thing, but it also presents those planning challenges. But we're ready to roll up our sleeves along with you and address those. And both Senate bills go a long way to do that. We want to make sure that as we're thinking through how our communities need to change to accommodate this new diversity in vehicle types, that we're looking at protecting folks. And that where a network ends abruptly, where the sidewalk ends, so to speak, where the trail ends, where the protected bikeway ends, that we're looking at the connection between that so we're not putting people in even greater risk and discouraging use of vehicle types that aren't necessarily a car, a van, or a truck. So networks help us prioritize those continuous travel, those linkages, and help people do those daily tasks. So protected lanes and plazas are also a wonderful and powerful tool for advancing equity. Research shows that some are more likely to ride in high stress conditions where you have cars, buses, trucks, but you want to use a micromobility device. So typically adult men are more likely to ride in those conditions. However, women, children, older adults, people with disabilities, they tend to avoid those types of environments that may make them feel unsafe, though not in every case. Protected infrastructure reduces risks by inviting more community members to walk and ride safely, which remains the central point of the protected infrastructure. So protected bike lanes also support our climate and sustainability goals by making low emission travel more reliable and attractive. And in a place that's a valley that traps emissions, it's even more important to provide options that are less polluting. And so making those options safer for use is critical. It also ties in really nicely with the transit system, especially Atlanta's fixed route network and bus rapid transit system. And protected lanes can increase access to stations and stops and strengthen those first and last mile connections, increasing overall choices. It's important to note that Senate Bill 824 not only enables communities to provide protected bike lanes that cyclists are mandated to use, but gives them flexibility to tailor the parking and biking rules to fit in their community. So the defined buffer and parking rules directly support the protection of cyclists in people using all sorts of devices, mobility devices, by distancing parked vehicles from bike lanes. This is absolutely critical as everything from development intensity to topography affect what happens in individual communities, but also across in connecting municipalities, the counties, and the Commonwealth. For Senate Bill 1008, micromobility is obviously rapidly involved. Senator Kearney noted that in his opening remarks. So it's gone from an emerging trend to a core component of the modern transportation system. As new devices from e-bikes and e-scooters and other lightweight electric vehicles enter the market, our planning frameworks must anticipate not only today's needs, but what we think we can reasonably expect in 10 to or even 20 years from now. So in the short term, micromobility provides travel options for people of all ages and backgrounds. They offer practical ways to get to those schools and work and to run errands. For many households, micromobility devices reduce barriers to opportunity and affordability, which is absolutely critical where we have significant populations of low to moderate income individuals with 0 or 1 vehicle households with multiple adults needing to get to work and children get to schools. One of the most significant short-term benefits of micromobility is its role again in that first and last mile and that connector to public transit. So lack of access to bus stops or rail stations has limited transit ridership, which we all know is an issue in the Commonwealth because people consistently ask for more transit. They just have to be able to get to it. So we don't want people to have to rely on personal vehicles, especially for short trips, if there's transit nearby. Micromobility can close this gap by providing options for travel for those beginning and final distances, get them to the bus stop, get them to the train, to put their device on those facilities and then go where they need to go. So that interoperability between modes is critical, especially as we see more and more and greater distances being traveled by e-bikes and e-scooters. So those long-term implications of micromobility extend beyond trip convenience. There's new lightweight autonomous devices that are going to be coming onto the market. You can find them on the internet, being developed by absolutely legitimate companies that we all know. There's updated battery technology, which is going to allow people to go further for longer. There's adaptive cargo systems, so we might start to see micromobility devices become freight devices as well. And evolving shared mobility models will continue to reshape how we travel, not only today, but in the future. So to prepare for this future, we've got to focus on designing networks that are flexible, scalable, and resilient, but also safe. The devices themselves be safe, and the facilities in which they operate be safe. And that's what Senate Bill 1008 really does accomplish should it be adopted into law. So long-term planning requires us to integrate these broader transportation land use strategies as a component of our transit planning, our pedestrian planning, our vehicle planning, whether it's cars interacting with e-scooters or e-bikes, and creating those complete streets, which is really what the Senate bills together do. And a complete street allows operation of vehicles of all types in a safe manner. And both of these laws go a long way to start to do that. 1008 also focuses on education. That is essential for safety and successful integration of micromobility. As new devices appear, people need clear, consistent guidance on how and where to ride. Educational initiatives can be delivered through schools, community centers, PennDOT, In our case, in the Lehigh Valley, we have Community Bike Works and the Coalition for Appropriate Transportation that directly do that, and we fund them through our metropolitan planning allocation from Congress, through our transportation alternative set-aside funds to make sure that we're doing education. They need to be able to expand those education offerings that they have inside the schools for K through 10, and then also for adults. And we believe the foundation of Senate Bill 1008 starts to elevate that is an absolute need, and then that will help us at the regional level be able to allocate funds more directly and help them modernize then their educational offerings. That's so important, particularly as our region grows 4,000 to 6,000 people a year. So I want to give you an example of an opportunity on the educational side, and something that actually Coalition for Appropriate Transportation and Community Bike Works work on in different ways. The Allentown School District does not operate its own school bus system. Instead, the district relies on children utilizing Lanta's public bus service, walking, biking, scootering, and parent pickup and drop off. A growing number of children arrive to school on e-scooters and e-bikes. Training, rules, and regulations about operating powered mobility devices safely and with proper safety equipment is an opportunity to support the city's children and build lifelong habits that will help achieve broader equity, environmental health, and economic goals. But you have to have the legal foundation for that to be done in a safe condition. So it also, the Senate Bill 1008 aligns with climate action and resiliency goals that we have here in the region, and that we actually developed in partnership with the Commonwealth's Department of Environmental Protection, with support of the U.S. Environmental Protection. So short vehicle trips are not only very efficient in terms of fuel use and emissions, but they make up a major part of urban and suburban travel. So shifting some of these trips to low emission devices can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve air quality. Beyond emissions, micromobility devices help us reduce congestion, roadway noise, and parking demand. So when paired again across modes with transit policy, we can make a difference. And both of these Senate bills go a very long way to getting us into a place where we as regional planners can invest better with our metropolitan planning resources in partnership with the Commonwealth, that can help support our local governments, our school districts, and our nonprofit partners who are working very hard in partnership with us to make not only our region better, but our air quality better, to make it more attractive to business. One of our biggest common issues that we're dealing with in the land development process through our bi-county planning review is talking to employers that say how we're going to get folks to work. It's beyond the parking lot at this point. People want the transit. They want employees to be able to have a place for their bikes. And if we continue to work together and refine the laws and how people can get to those jobs, those places of business, those schools, those medical appointments, those parks and recreation facilities, we will have a healthier, more sustainable, and more economically attractive and resilient Commonwealth. Thank you again very much for inviting me to speak today and for allowing me to join you via car. I guess I'll turn it back over to you, Senator Miller, for questions.
Thank you, Becky, and appreciate your commentary. I'll let you get to your press conference. It's close to 10:30. Senator Carney, any questions for Becky? Okay. All right. Thank you, Becky, again. Appreciate it, and thank you again for hosting us. We'll move right into PennDOT. Henry Beaver and Dan Farley, Director of Operations, and also the Special Assistant to the Deputy Secretary for Multimodal Transportation. Henry, if you want to get us started then.
Good morning, Chair Miller, Senator Carney, members of the committee. My name is Hank Beaver, and I'm the Special Assistant to the Deputy Secretary for Multimodal Transportation. I am joined today, thank you. I'm joined today by my colleague Daniel Farley, Director of PennDOT's Bureau of Operations with our Highway Administration Deputate. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today regarding micromobility solutions and safety. Diverse modes of micromobility are increasingly common across Pennsylvania, and their use impacts transportation accessibility and roadway safety. We appear before you today to speak to critical considerations for micromobility devices. Mr. Farley's Bureau of Operations and the broader Highway Administration Deputate oversee aspects of highway safety, while my multimodal deputate focuses on supporting different interconnecting types of transportation beyond traditional motor vehicles that Pennsylvanians use to move throughout the Commonwealth, and thus oversees micromobility users and initiatives. As you know, a host of bills have been introduced during this legislative session surrounding micromobility, including legislation related to low-speed electric scooters, e-scooters. Senate Bill 1008, sponsored by Senator Carney, seeks to address both commercial operation and private ownership of low-speed e-scooters. Today, we will share PennDOT's ideal framework for the safe, legal operation of low-speed e-scooters in the commercial and private sectors. A shared low-speed e-scooter pilot program launched in the city of Pittsburgh in July of 2021. It was statutorily authorized for 2 years and expired in July of 2023. Legislation has not yet reauthorized the use of low-speed e-scooters, either commercially or for private use in Pennsylvania. PennDOT agrees that the Commonwealth needs statewide legal frameworks for both low-speed e-scooters and micromobility devices more broadly that acknowledge the widespread proliferation of micromobility devices while providing the necessary safeguards to protect users. In general, low-speed e-scooters should be regulated much the same as pedal cycles, and core rules and requirements should apply equally to private and commercial use of low-speed e-scooters. Municipalities should be permitted to impose stricter requirements for low-speed e-scooter use. This ensures a uniform statewide standard while preserving the authority of local governments to address the unique needs and challenges of their communities. If lawmakers consider legalizing low-speed e-scooters in the Commonwealth, meaning a device that weighs less than 100 pounds, has handlebars and an electric motor, has a floorboard or seat, and is solely powered by an electric motor or combination of human power and electric motor power, as defined by Senate Bill 1008, they should consider the following. First, low-speed e-scooters should not be considered motor vehicles, and as such should be exempt from registration, titling, and inspection requirements. Similarly, a driver's license should not be required to operate a low-speed e-scooter. Second, operational and device requirements are critical for the safety of low-speed e-scooter riders and non-riders alike. These requirements should include a maximum legal speed, limits to where a low-speed e-scooter can be operated, such as within pedal cycle lanes, but not between lanes of traffic, or on roads with posted speed limits above a certain threshold. And brake, lighting, reflector, and sound signal device requirements should be established. Third, low-speed e-scooter rider limitations further increase safety and decrease the chances of tragedies involving riders, as have occurred in recent months in several regions of the Commonwealth. Riders should be a minimum age to operate a low-speed e-scooter. The number of riders per device should be limited. Commercial rentals should not be made to minors, and helmets should be required for all riders. Fourth, the General Assembly should enact standard assumption of risk language for low-speed e-scooter riders that helps clarify liability for collisions or damages that occur while operating a low-speed e-scooter. PennDOT remains committed to working with our partners in the General Assembly and with law enforcement, including our colleagues at the Pennsylvania State Police, to find an agreeable path forward to regulate low-speed e-scooters specifically and to address micromobility challenges holistically. Compromise legal frameworks for low-speed e-scooters are possible and can be crafted to balance the widespread use of low-speed e-scooters with the inherent safety risks of these micromobility devices. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you. Dan.
Thank you. I just kind of echo Hank's words there from, what we provided as testimony.
Okay, thank you. Senator Carney, any questions or follow-up on the testimony?
Sure, thank you very much for your testimony today. I think certainly the intent behind 1008 is consistent with what you've described here in terms of moving things forward. I know we have issues with trying to link the commercial use and the private ownership, which is why we are pushing to have 1008 be really just for private use. A lot of that has to do with the things you talked about, the registration requirements, and in particular insurance, and how that sort of works. One of the things that we don't really talk about very often is that because they're not defined under the motor vehicle code, you actually can't purchase insurance for an e-scooter right now in Pennsylvania. We want that to be an option for people that they can, because I'm sure you know, as soon as you put a motor on something, it ceases to be covered under your homeowner's insurance. And that's kind of one of the things we don't really talk about very often. I wanted to ask just a question about the standard assumption of risk language, and kind of how do you see that? I mean, obviously, what the law seeks to do is limit where you can ride them, and trying to diminish, severely reduce the number of accidents that we're seeing.
So I think it would be important to note that we would not want to be the final say on what that language might take.
Mm-hmm.
But while we certainly have some thoughts about what shape that may take, Senator, I would defer, frankly, to people who are far smarter than me and attorneys, which I am not one, to discuss some of that. But I certainly would be happy to discuss more details about inherent assumption of risk language
Mm-hmm.
with our counsel, and hopefully get that to you at a
I
later
know that
date.
we had been thinking about it in terms of like part of the educational component, where getting people to understand what the kind of rules are and how it actually works. On the there's a part of the bill that calls for a question to be added into the driver's exam, for example, about how to deal with the interaction between cars and micromobility. So I mean, we hopefully we'll get protected bike lane legislation passed this year. That would be a huge thing, kind of moving forward. But so thank you for your testimony today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Carney. Just a follow-up, and today in the morning call, there's an op-ed by Scott Bond, who we're going to hear from in just a couple of minutes. It's pretty consistent that a statewide kind of regulation is important, and you mentioned if municipalities want to put stricter rules and regulations on, whether it's like an urban environment for certain reasons, is pretty much agreed to. I'm just kind of curious, any additional thoughts on registering them with municipalities or PennDOT? Why we would not do that? I know the challenge with there has to be liability insurance with these, just given the number of accidents that they have caused. But any additional thoughts on the registration with municipalities?
I think as far as what a municipality would provide for, that would be solely up to the discretion of the legislature to determine whether or not a municipality should make their registration requirements more strict than what would be offered by what I discussed in my testimony. However, I think we'd be happy to work as partners with some of that and discuss what that might take. But as far as specific information regarding that, I'm not sure that we would be willing to, I'm not sure we're prepared for that.
Understood.
At current.
Yep. Okay.
Understanding that all municipalities are different too.
Yeah, correct. Yes. Yeah. And I think that's why the consensus for a broad statewide kind of just base guardrails is important to get done. And then if municipalities want to take the next step to further regulate them, they should. So, all right. Not seeing any further questions from our folks online either. Thank you to both of you for testifying. We will move to Samantha Pearson from from the Healthy Communities Program Manager at the Pennsylvania Downtown Center, and Gani Dimby from the Director of Programs, Mobilify Southwestern Pennsylvania. Sam, when you're ready, you can start.
We're going to take 1 second to start up our presentation. But in the meantime, I'll say thanks so much for inviting us, and thank you so much to Julie for all of your help in kind of getting us set up with the logistics and such. Okay, great. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for having us here. I'm Ngani Ndimbie, as you mentioned, Director of Programs at Mobilify Southwestern Pennsylvania, which is a nonprofit advocacy organization focused on increasing multimodal mobility and efficient land use in the southwestern Pennsylvania region. I also was at PennDOT previously, so I'm glad we heard from my colleagues directly before. There I focused a lot on micromobility, especially early in my time and tenure at PennDOT starting in around 2018. So I'm really glad to be here today and to share a lot of the lessons I learned while there and lessons from around the country as well.
Thank you. My name is Samantha Pearson. I am the Healthy Communities Program Manager with the Pennsylvania Downtown Center. We administer the WalkWorks program in coordination with the Pennsylvania Department of Health, providing funding and technical assistance to communities for the development of active transportation plans. My own background is in design and planning, and also involved in advocacy and now grant making and policy recommendations. We should mention that we are both part of a new coalition, statewide coalition called the Coalition for Active Mobility in Pennsylvania. This is a coalition of organizations around the state starting up in order to provide a unified voice for people and the rights of people to use active mobility devices, walking, biking, using wheelchairs, other mobility and micromobility devices, accessing transit and trails to get around in their everyday lives.
Okay, so today we're gonna try and go through a bunch of things, talking about micromobility generally. We'll focus, of course, on scooters. Throughout the presentation, you'll see that both Samantha and I follow people around Pennsylvania who are using micromobility devices. We have found people's adoption of these devices to be really fascinating, really important, and we'll be talking about the things that we found throughout Pennsylvania in the last many years. So on this slide, some people enjoying the green belt in 2021. So generally speaking, what is micromobility? What are we talking about? So one term we wanted to just kind of quickly get out of the way is microtransit, which is different from micromobility. When you're talking about microtransit, you're often talking about smaller public transportation-related vehicles that are demand responsive. Sometimes we hear people interchanging those two terms, but what we are instead talking about is micromobility. So everyone agrees that we're talking about e-bikes, we're talking about e-scooters, and also bikes and kick scooters, and so it's things that are smaller weight, using human power, and some considered to be under 125-ish pounds, 100 pounds there. However, importantly, the form factors of these micromobility devices are kind of growing and changing so that we're actually end up talking often in kind of this bigger category, frankly, because sometimes people are substituting for other options that are in the same thing. So you'll sort of see that we're really gonna talk a lot about all of the things under about 1,000 pounds. Anything to add, Sam? Okay, great. Okay. All right, so One of the best tools that we have is the Micromobility information sheet, which PennDOT did not discuss, but we'll show on a few slides later. I'm sure you're familiar with it. So on this slide, when we'll show this sheet later in this presentation, but when we say defined and on sheet and not on sheet, we're referring to PennDOT's Micromobility information sheet. So this is sort of the global view here, right? These are all devices that you've probably seen on Pennsylvania roads. Some are talked about on that sheet. Some are actually, they're defined in the vehicle code in Title 75, but they're not on the sheet. And then we have a bunch that are actually not quite defined yet, which brings me to one of my, yes, maybe my masterpiece, okay? Which is the Title 75 sorter, is a new and innovative device that I have created to maybe make sense of Title 75. So each one of these trapezoids, we're calling a bucket, so it's kind of bucket-like, somewhat bucket-shaped, right? So the first two things that have come out of the sorter, oh, I have to be in the microphone. All right, the first two things that have come out of the sorter, you see, have fallen into this undefined land, right? So the first two that popped out are this unicycle and also this plain old kick scooter. So they've shot out of that pipe and they've come down, and because they have wheels and no motor and they're not a bicycle, right? That's the one thing other than, I mean, it's the one personal conveyance in Title 75 that has wheels and no motor that's defined, right? So they don't fit the bicycle bucket, and so they fall into undefined, right? All right, so the next thing that's popped out of this Title 75 sorter is, into the Title 75 sorter is this powered e-scooter, right? So it doesn't fall into this wheels and no motor side, so it instead goes over to this other side with wheels and a motor. And when you have wheels and a motor, there's actually a huge gravitational pull to motor vehicles. That's where it wants to pull you, because the definition of motor vehicle in Title 75 says that if you have wheels and a motor, you are a motor vehicle, and then subject to FMVSS if you're going to be on the road. So you see my road dividing thing, right? The things that are above are cars and trucks, and they are subject to federal motor vehicle safety standards, so, rear view, whatever. The things that are below are things that have wheels and a motor and are defined, and they are generally meant to be used off-road. So that includes your dirt bike, your ATV, your golf cart, those types of things, right? Now, the exceptions from that are the buckets above, right? So if you don't fall into one of those buckets, then you're then in that motor vehicle bucket instead. So where does our scooter go? Into this not road legal part. They fall all the way down there because there isn't a bucket that holds them otherwise, right? So I will also, I don't necessarily need to note here, but generally speaking, the way that Title 75 is organized is organized around different vehicle speeds and different vehicle weights. And as you go up, as you scale up in weight, and as you scale up in power, there's more responsibility. And there's more responsibility for education and requirements, and there's more responsibility for licensing, titling, those types of things, right? So I think those are all pretty important. Okay, so one more click will head you to the fact that there's some other states, including California, they have a low-speed device, kind of a catch-all low-speed device. So they, for example, California has a definition for e-scooter, e-skateboard, but then they also have electrically motorized board, which is this kind of like, if you've got some sort of platform and some sort of wheels going on, then you need, and you have a max speed of 20 miles per hour, then you need to ride on roads that are less than 35 miles per hour. You need to generally act like a bike. You can do this. You have to wear a helmet, blah, 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 right? So they also have this catch-all, and a few states have these catch-all definitions in addition to these specific ones, sort of saying, if it's slow, take it, ride as far right as practicable, do these really simple things. So that's actually also a very useful tool that we've seen in some other states as well. Okay, so glad to be here because I've always want to talk about 6109, but I think that you are the nerds to talk about Title 75, Section 6109 too. So already within the vehicle code, as where it defines police powers, it specifically says already that municipalities can regulate people on skates, coasters, other toy vehicles, right? So it kind of already gives municipalities, arguably, perhaps. I think it's a good thing to be in conversation with PennDOT about how this is meant to be interpreted, because technically and Title 75 does this in a lot of ways. As it defines the bicycle, it says we don't mean a big wheel. So it says we don't mean like a device meant for just a child, right? So we don't mean the thing with the big wheel in front and just little pedals, right? So because Title 75 is concerned with, the transportation system, right? It's concerned with how people get around on roads. And so this is one of the other ways it tells you that, where it says, hey, we had this whole big title that's telling you how the department should operate and regulate, transportation and how we want roads to operate. We're not the Department of Skates. We're not the Department of Barbie's Dream Car, right? And gives this tool. And so I think just figuring out how this should be applied, because that's also already been thought through, I think is useful. That's for you. Okay, so the micromobility information sheet, as we've expressed, is a very, very important tool. This is the third iteration of it. I was really proud to kind of be one of the people who led bringing in the first one and helping for the second. I think it just is endlessly useful, and I'm so thankful to my former colleagues for keeping this information up and going. It's increasingly, we see it being put up on municipal sites as a form of information and a way of getting information out to the public. I think you can really see here on the micromobility information sheet the way in which, as the device gets heavier, it steps up in how much you have, like the requirements related to it. And that's kind of a key thing that I think it shows. And so it should hopefully also inform people that, hey, if you want to only have the requirements of an e-bike, then ride an e-bike, right? Otherwise, you're going to have licensing requirements. Otherwise, you're going to have titling requirements and so forth. And so, yes, this is just showing the other side of this. Anything to add here? Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's most notable here in this iteration, we do see, as we spoke at the beginning in the taxonomy discussion, that e-scooters are shown on this sheet, but they are also described as not defined. And in fact, it is not until you get into the fine print below the table that it actually tells you that they are not legal to use on roads, streets, highways, and sidewalks, only on private property. So I think this iteration of the sheet is helpful, but we'll probably continue to see it shifting over time, certainly in response to any developments here, but also just recognizing that it is a complex environment. This sheet sort of demonstrates that. It illustrates the complexity.
Yeah. Okay, so wanted to get into, this is the part where you see all the evidence of us chasing down people who are on these amazing devices, right? So here are some people, as we describe these use cases, these are Pennsylvanians, right? And these are how Pennsylvanians are deciding to get around. The first person is a gentleman who I met as I was leaving work one evening, and he's an older person who used his seated electric scooter so that he could take more trips. He could get more places with the amount of energy he has available to him bodily in any given day. The next is a fellow I met just heading down Green Street on a gorgeous fall day, noting that some of the benefits of these types of trips are the increase in mobility for the man on the left, and then that the employer of the person on the right doesn't need to provide an additional parking space, doesn't need to, it's lower emissions and so forth. Okay, so we'll also just quickly talk a little bit about e-bikes and And things that we're seeing in e-bikes, we see a lot of kid carrying. The person on the furthest left here actually was kind of an early pioneer. Not long after e-bikes became legal in Pennsylvania in 2014, brought this bike actually over from Japan to carry herself and her kids. But as we've seen, there's just such an explosion in kid carrying as a use case for e-bikes. Sam, would you like to talk about some others?
Sure. So we can see at the top, it's rather small, but this is a picture of a young person, quite young actually, who's enterprising, has developed his own lawn care business, and travels around his community on a e-bike. It's a legal e-bike, but he is too young, according to our current laws. He is carting along behind him his lawn care business equipment. This is sort of the kind of thing we ideally would like to encourage. It's kind of heartwarming to see. We also see people in the lower right corner on devices that are borderline not e-bikes. They almost qualify. The wheels may be too small entirely. We know people are using devices like this for convenience. Are they able to get them on the bus? Can they get them into their apartment, their room? They may need something that is really quite tiny, but again, it's meeting the need of the moment, and we know that there are benefits both to the individuals, the communities, and the state as a whole when people have more options to get where they need to go.
Yeah, and I'll round this out with that final image, which is of the e-bike that's available in Philadelphia's bike share system. So bike share systems across the Commonwealth, including State College and in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia, all have e-bikes available. It's incredibly popular. People love the e-bikes. It's one of the ways in which you get the benefits of an e-bike without the ownership challenges, which includes the fact that they're heavier, so on and so forth. They're very, very popular. It's also a great source of data because there's, origin and destination and route trip data and length for all of those trips as well. Okay, so key challenges. A key challenge with e-bikes is the fact that e-motos exist. I'm just going to note for the record that, because I feel like both of you understand probably that e-motos are the colloquial term that is used to refer to things that are heavier, faster, more dangerous than e-bikes, but tend to look a fair bit like them. A lot of the conversations and a lot of the challenges that people are seeing and expressing about e-bikes are actually often e-motos, so things that are outside of what fits the legal definition of an e-bike. This is also a time to say we really also applaud that these two things are being discussed separately, that we're taking on e-scooters separately from e-bikes. Okay, other challenges we've heard, again, enforceability, chaotic retail environment, gaps in consumer education and communication, age appropriateness, complications, buyers, criminalization, and all of the, and how everyone's piling on and trying to figure out how to create some order. So we're bucketing some of these solutions that we're going to quickly go through. One solution is education, making sure that residents understand what the product specifications are for what they're trying to buy. And this, I want to note, is that I think is a huge part of the problem. I think it's really easy to buy something overpowered. It's really easy to, it's unlike people who are buying a car. You can't walk into a dealership and buy a non-road legal car. It is so easy to go online and buy something that is so far from safe and is so far from legal. And so we have a lot of catch up to do on education to change that. So there's retailer education that's also needed, because sometimes you'll have a bike shop that is unknowingly selling something that doesn't meet the definition in Pennsylvania. What I show here in a photo is in Minneapolis when I was there last year, where they actually used an opportunity in infrastructure to kind of also reiterate the rules of the road as well. Okay. In enforcement, just noting that for when there's shared and commercial owned e-scooters, there is compliance can be helped by the fact that there's geofencing. So we'll see in places where there's boardwalks, there's popular areas, they try to say, walk your device here. Geofencing is a way of making the compliance happen. Large labels, Creating a culture of helmet use without necessarily requiring it is really important. Incorporating creative solutions for increasing compliance, like using hangers to educate people on the device. This is not a legal device, is type of thing is useful. And we've seen that happening in places like California. 4, safety. Improved infrastructure, as we heard from Becky, is just like such an important space. Speed governors on shared e-scooters, sometimes they're used to limit the first rides to a max speed of 8 miles per hour. Also, encouraging the use of UL-rated devices for fire safety is great, and educating about battery can be done as well. We, as lawmakers, noting that avoiding the patchwork is really important, and state laws that increase standardization is wonderful. For e-bikes, separately, joining the states that use the 3-class system. And then, as we mentioned, using those catch-all laws that kind of bring all of the other devices into compliance. Labeling requirements can also be helpful, and they're pretty standard in other types of law. Might be not usually used for e-scooters, but if you wanted, it could also be a tool. Okay, we're rounding this out. So the safe systems approach is one of the tools of ways that we talk about traffic safety, just noting that just as a high-level concept, we say that when we have safe road users who know the laws, when we have vehicles that are safe, so this is actually both the automobile as well as the, whatever device they're riding, when people are going at safe speeds, and you have designs that support it, and then, of course, post-cash care that can be quick enough, that's when you really do it. So just creating this redundant system where it's not just the roads, it's not just anything.
Also critically in the safe system approach are the principles around the outer edge of the circle, which are harder to see, but among those is included that safety is a shared responsibility. And I think that's really critical here in this discussion, because it is about the rider, the driver, the decision makers like yourselves, people who are making laws and policies, the people who are designing the roads, building the roads, and maintaining the roads. That is the share, and so that's where we can see that infrastructure plays a huge role, really, in how behavior plays out.
Okay. All right. So, rounding out, micromobility devices are expanding mobilities for Pennsylvanians who need it. Transportation is really expensive. It's usually the second highest household cost. Cars are incredibly expensive, and micromobility devices are allowing people to get to where they want to need to go. There's a need to improve safety outcomes, and we need to figure out how to incorporate these devices into our transportation systems. We also need to make it easier to do, and in this case, buy the right thing. It's really easy to buy a device that does not meet what people want, and we need to do a lot to help that. We need to protect kids, and we need to invest in Pennsylvania, make sure that the education and the infrastructure are supportive, and also done in a way that supports the fact that we're trying to grow our outdoor economy and other things as well. Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, and thank you, and those visuals were very helpful. Senator Carney, any follow-up?
No, that was a very good presentation on the issues that we're talking about. I think one question I had was about I'm very familiar with governors in terms of controlling the speeds of these things, and we are starting to see scooters that are being sold that can actually go up to like 50 miles an hour, which is crazy in lots of ways. But you mentioned something about first ride on governors. How does that work?
Yeah, so there's been some really great research in the public health sphere. I'm going to say 2019, 2020-ish, Austin worked with the CDC, did this study where they focused on emergency room data from scooter crashes involving e-scooters, right? And one of the things that they did in their surveying of these patients was ask which ride, how many times have you ridden an e-scooter? One of the things that that showed is that the people who were admitted to the emergency room, they were often on their first or second ride, right? And so that's one of those things where you're like, I read this report and I said, this makes so much sense. We don't evaluate the safety of a bicycle by how successful people are on their very first ride of a bicycle, right? Right. And so similarly, when you're considering an e-scooter, it seems that if you make it so that people can only ride at lower speeds on those early rides, which some scooter companies started doing, it means that you're less likely to have these outcomes, which I think is a really smart response to some useful inquiry and data.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It was interesting in Delaware County, after the incident with Abby happened, a lot of municipalities passed their own regulations around. So we had Ridley Township, for example, which is where she lived, just basically said they're outlawed. You can't use them at all. And of course, if you drive through Ridley, you see them all over the place, in terms of, we also had ones which were trying to encourage kids to wear helmets, which is a big deal. And I think I personally see a lot more helmets now than I did a year ago, kind of thing. So I think that's a good thing. Are you seeing more regulations around just regular bicycles in municipalities coming in the local level? I mean, we're with 1008, we're really trying to define the low-speed micromobility things as basically the same as bicycles. We don't want to get into the registering them, for example, or having insurance requirements and the like.
So for bicycles, sorry, Sam, you can take.
I think what we're seeing is pressure for regulation, but the pressure seems to be caused in large part by the e-motos. People are responding to the real threat, not just of the capability of the e-motos, but also the behavior of the riders, the choices of the riders. Just because your motor vehicle, like a car, could go over 100 miles an hour, ideally you are not driving it over 100 miles an hour on a regular basis. Similarly, we could have people riding more powerful devices more reasonably, and so that's the current tension. It is the Wild West, right? One of our concerns is that regular bicycles and the legitimately classified low-speed bicycles that we have, currently the class 1 and 2, which we don't use in Pennsylvania, but the limited to 20 miles per hour boosted e-bikes, our concern is those should remain accessible, useful, accessible in particular for people with a wide range of limits to their access to transportation. There are people who have physical limitations, there are people who have actual other challenges with obtaining a license, or may have other challenges with getting access to other forms of transportation. And so we want there to be a broad array of options that are readily available. And so that's where drawing that line is. And so one reason we were eager to be here is precisely to sort of try to draw that line between the e-moto that is pushing potentially excessive regulation further down the line. We would like the e-motos to be cracked down on. There are examples in Europe of law enforcement actually being out on sidewalks and having people test the power and the top speed with a mobile testing device, because it is true, it can be hard to tell. Some of them are obvious, others less so. You can also have an e-bike or an e-moto that actually looks perfectly normal. It looks quite light, but it might still have way too much battery power or way too much speed potential. And so
And those are done very often through hacking the system or hacking the bike, or it's like.
Or sometimes you buy it. That's what you bought.
Yeah.
And I think it's really easy to buy. It's really easy to buy something that's marketed as an e-bike that does not meet the legal definition of an e-bike
Right.
anywhere in these United States.
But we've always had regulations around the difference between motorcycles
Yes.
and Vespas, or kind of things. And I know it was always difficult necessarily to figure out where the things occurred. Go ahead.
Well, and that's really important. We do know we have all these categories, these buckets that Ganny was talking about, for example, for dirt bikes, off-road dirt bikes. But precisely because we now have these new categories creeping in, we're seeing more dirt bikes on the road because they sort of are camouflaged in the scrum of all sorts of people showing up with things that are a little bit nebulous. We do see that places that have more people riding bikes in general become safer for more people to ride bikes, but at the same time, we do see, we are hoping that we can resolve this. The idea that more people are now riding with helmets in Delaware County, sometimes it's incidents that can prompt this. It can also be education at the early grades. We've both been involved with organizations, and I currently do training programs for first and second graders, where we are getting them on balance bikes, putting the helmets on them, talking to them about just the importance of helmets. We want to normalize that so that by the time they get to the older ages, they put them on. I bought my first helmet, we were talking about it last night, when I went to grad school. So, you know, that was a different world many decades ago.
It was interesting, and when we first published the fact that we were, you know, pushing this bill, I think the first 5 or 6 calls to the office were from people in their 30s and 40s who were using them for last mile transportation. I mean, they, you know, they don't want to drive the mile to go to the train station and then pay to park it, and et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, the fact that they could pop over on their e-scooters were, you know, and just fold it up and carry it with them, or lock it, kind of thing, is a benefit we don't want to, we want to keep. We want to make sure it works that way. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you both. I'd like to bring up our 2 police chiefs we have here, Chief Roca and Sabo, to talk about some of the solutions we've heard and solutions that they may have seen on the ground. And Scott Maughan from the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Chiefs of Police Association as well. Chief Roca, if you want to kick us off.
Thank you, Senator Miller. Thank you, Senator Kearney, for this very important invite and discussion into micromobility and solutions. I want to say that at foremost, when we're thinking about this issue, we have to think who's at the center of this, and that's our residents of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And as Chief of Police in the City of Allentown, it is my job to ensure safety, public safety. And we have received multiple complaints about dirt bikes, e-bikes, different things that are being ridden in an inappropriate manner. I have personally observed individuals driving in the lane of traffic, on the sidewalk, so on and so forth. And I want to share with you, the last presenter did an excellent job in talking about the fact sheet, but these are pieces of information that present difficulty for our officers in identifying what they're really looking at. We don't have a fast and accurate way of identifying it. It might be a feeling, but we don't have a weight on it. We can't predict how fast it's going. Municipal governments do not have the ability to use radar. We have to use NRAD and other means. So to contribute to safety, the City of Allentown is making enforcement efforts, but it shouldn't always be just about enforcement. I want to talk clearly about education, understanding what the issue is and what the problem is. Do I think that there could be a solution in place? Absolutely. And it's very important that the feedback from law enforcement is heard. When we talk about empowering municipalities to create their own ordinances and such to do that, I think that's a step in the right direction, but it provides inconsistency in enforcement and application of same. So if you're in an urban environment like the City of Allentown, it'll be way different than if you're in a rural area in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So when we look at it and you think about getting insurance or registration, how is that going to be searchable? How can a police officer cite or take enforcement action if that's the case? Ultimately, I heard a prior chief talk in another discussion point where he talked about the lug nut effect. And he said it was tongue-in-cheek, but it was where the more lug nuts it has, it's usually the more impactful it can be. And now we want to make it where we have young people, especially going to school, on e-scooters, which is a huge concern for me because of the behavior that I talked about. That doesn't mean that the parents aren't involved, but it does mean that choices are being made. And I think a question that drives at any law that we consider is what is the acceptable risk for our Commonwealth? Are we introducing something that is not manageable or will proliferate the enhancement of illegal dirt bike riding or the catch-all of the e-motorbikes that was discussed? In Allentown in 2026 in July at 7th and Liberty, we had a fatality of an individual operating an e-scooter. At 8th and Chew on July 4th of 2025, we had another fatality on the e-scooter. You know, in Allentown, we work very closely with our violence prevention partners. And one of the things that they are fond of saying, and I truly believe in, is one life lost is one too many. When we have a fatality in an individual using micromobility, it's very much impacts not just that person, but their family, the community. I fully appreciate and understand the point where it's that last mile where a person wants to get to a situation, but we also have to think about how is this going to impact the government itself? What infrastructure is already there that can support this? And is there something that the state can do to help with achieving that goal? Oftentimes that when we think about creating regulations, it's about getting that training out to our police officers and whatever their municipality is experiencing to take specific action. And I don't want a situation to happen where there is a law that's created by the state and the municipalities create another ordinance and then it conflicts. Because then what we'll have is we'll have a judge that will throw that out and that ordinance will be ruled unconstitutional because the state law obviously supersedes local ordinance. We've had, in Allentown, we've had 58 collisions involving these type of vehicles, and the officer specified that it was an e-vehicle. Like I said, 2 were fatalities, both were on electric scooters, and 40 non-fatal injuries for the individuals on the e-vehicle. And obviously in our reports, we indicate what the cause of the action or the collisions was, and in the leading cause was other improper driving actions. So it's about taking personal responsibility and accountability. We have had 517 motorbike complaint calls for service this year, compared to the same time to 233 the same time last year. That is a 121.8% increase. Now I want to thank former Senator Pat Brown for helping us craft legislation that was effective in dealing with the dirt bike situation. And I'm going to use it all together because I think it's, you know, if you're not in a motor vehicle, but you're on a motorcycle or a dirt bike, we have ways that we need to conduct this enforcement. And we've had different types of calls for service all over time, and it's key that as we consider moving forward, that, you know, I've understood and listened to Chief Bond talk before, and I do agree with his position that it has to be clear what we're enforcing. For a police officer, if it's ambiguous, that's not a good way to enforce the law. The equipment itself, we talk about the toothpaste being out of the tube. What stopped us from talking to the manufacturers of these vehicles or systems and actually addressing it? Because I would submit when it's on the road, it's not a toy. It's some form of conveyance, right? And we want to make sure that that conveyance is safe for our people. You heard from previous testimony that there's a lot of individuals that are driving, these young people. We need to make sure that the parents understand the risks associated with having their child out. Do I think it's important to have the safety features, the elbow pads, knee pads, the helmet? Absolutely, especially for our young people who are developing physically, mentally, and emotionally. And it's important that we have that at the end of the way. Again, I'm going to always advocate for a unified state approach to this issue because the discussion points are important. It's key that whatever laws are made are enforceable and that we give the tools necessary for our law enforcement officers who work the shift every day to understand, like, okay, this is why we're doing it. Because having just, okay, you're going to do this is not the motivation. But at the center of it is identifying the importance of life for the life, safety, and wellness of our residents. That's the primary factor. And I think people will come along with that. And as we increase that education component, the enforcement portion will be very much in lockstep with that. And of course, if there's engineering needs, right? We talk about the 3 E's of addressing a situation of that: the education, the enforcement, and the engineering. and then have that education piece. If riders are choosing to do this, it's not unlike you're preparing to drive a vehicle. My daughter just passed her driver's license test after months of on-the-road specific training with my wife, myself, and being able to, kind of understand, you can't control external factors as a driver, but you can control what you do. And we take that responsibility very seriously. And the question I think before you is, what are the steps that the legislature can take to ensure that it's consistent across the Commonwealth, that appropriate consequences are put forth? And then in a community like Allentown, where we're low to moderate income, fines and costs do impact the family. And it could be a mistake of heart, but we have that compassion to understand that sometimes that might be their only way to work. And each of us come from different backgrounds, so we have to always consider our population, our constituency, and what special things we make as lawmakers, as law enforcement, to be sure that our community is not only fair, but with respect to the many differences that make our Commonwealth great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Sabo.
Senator Miller, thank you for the invite. Senator Kearney, thank you. I appreciate being invited here as a first-class township wedged between two of the largest cities in the Lehigh Valley. I think this is an opportunity to state that all municipalities in Pennsylvania are facing the growing challenges involving e-bike, scooters, and other devices with the multimodal. This is not just an urban environment issue, but transcends boroughs, townships, cities throughout the Commonwealth. While Senate Bill 1008, Abby's Law, is a respectful bill after a tragic loss, it highlights other areas of concern that must be addressed moving forward. There's a fine balance that must be considered when various types of intermodal devices share the road with pedestrians, vehicles, bicycles, and other devices in regards to the overall health, safety, and welfare of the public. The rules of the road, like Chief Roca talked about, need to be clear and concise for all, specifically when we talk about enforcement. And I'll use an example. A couple years ago, we had a noise ordinance for dirt bikes, and the ordinance went into depth about 4-cycle and 2-cycle motors, and it was a disaster for enforcement because officers didn't know all the time how to enforce and what they need to enforce. So patrol officers should have specific and attainable enforcement parameters that easily identify and enforce certain unlawful devices and the knowledge and codes to back their decisions. Likewise, the operating public should have clear and concise guidelines in an updated vehicle code so that statute can be applied fairly and safely across the board with knowledge for all. Furthermore, education of the statute is important to get the message out. Safety for all involved, including motorists, law enforcement, parents, riders, and anyone using these devices. I think this is a solid starting point, but I feel a clearer path may be needed to regulate, educate, and enforce various forms of transportation moving forward into the future with a more comprehensive statewide plan of action, like Chief Roca stated, that we can enforce across the board so the officers have the tools to enforce and or educate and go out in our communities and make them safer for everyone involved.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Bone.
Oh, thank you, Chief. Good morning. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting us to testify on this important issue. Just by way of background, I'm in my 4th decade of law enforcement service. I appreciate the Chief referring to me as Chief, but now my phone's probably going to ring at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I enjoy not having to answer the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning anymore. From the perspective of the Pennsylvania Chiefs of Police Association and the broader law enforcement community, I think and we think the intent behind Senate Bill 1008 is acknowledged and respected. We also believe that the legislation presents significant operational enforcement and public safety concerns that, if indicated in its current form or as it is enumerated, may inadvertently increase rather than reduce the risk of serious injuries and fatalities on Pennsylvania roadways. I do appreciate early on I did get a chance to respond back to the Senate on the first iteration of the bill. I know that there were some amendments made, following, feedback that had come back in, and I do appreciate that effort. And I think we sent responses back on the amendment. So, I'm going to approach this more from a theme, and I might be reiterating some of the points that the chiefs made. Both are well respected in the law enforcement space and community, so I appreciate their testimony. We believe that before Pennsylvania legalizes e-bikes, it's got to get safety right. That's first and foremost. Pennsylvania is confronting a growing public safety challenge involving e-bikes, e-scooters, and other micromobility devices. The concern is no longer theoretical. PennDOT reported bicycle fatalities rose from 19 in 2024 to 28 in 2025. I'm currently getting additional statistics, and certainly I appreciate the chief's statistics just here in Allentown. I do know that this summer, a 12-year-old county boy died following an e-bike collision with a pickup truck, and last year, of course, the death of the 12-year-old Abigail Abby Gillen in Delaware County e-scooter crash that became the catalyst, for that bill. I reside down in Westchester and Chester County, so I'm infinitely familiar with that particular incident, the tragic incident. So the Pennsylvania Chiefs of Police respects the purpose behind the legislation. No family should endure such a loss, and lawmakers are right to address technology that has outpaced the vehicle code. But good intentions do not automatically produce effective public safety policy. The question is not, in Pennsylvania, should we respond? It's whether the proposed framework can actually be enforced and whether it will reduce injuries and deaths. And I certainly think that should be our intent. The legislation would authorize low-speed electric scooters under defined conditions. It would also prohibit riders under 16, require helmets for riders under 18, impose a 20-mile-an-hour operating limit in specified areas, and apply many bicycle traffic rules. Yet it does not provide the comprehensive licensing, training, identification, and accountability framework normally associated with motorized roadway use. Traffic laws work best when they are clear at the roadside. An officer must be able to identify the device, determine whether it is lawful, identify the operator, verify applicable requirements, and take action. That becomes much more difficult when the operator is a minor. The device lacks readily identifiable registration, and its technical capabilities may be difficult to determine during a street encounter, and that includes any modifications that may have been made to the bike after purchase. Pennsylvania already faces similar challenges with e-bikes, where device classifications, as I had mentioned, after markets, modifications, and varying capabilities complicate enforcement. So this is not merely a drafting problem, it's an operational enforcement problem. We recognize, and we have reviewed subsequent proposals to strengthen the scooter framework. Local registration inspection authority, restrictions on higher speed roadways and certain sidewalks, parental responsibility, provisions, and creation of a general fence for unauthorized devices, I think are constructive steps. But they do not resolve the central weakness. Law enforcement needs more than the authority on paper. Officers need a statute that is understood by riders and parents that can be applied safely, fairly, and consistently across the Commonwealth. Optional municipal registration inspection invite a patchwork of rules across Pennsylvania's 2,500 plus municipalities. Insurance may remain discretionary. Warning first enforcement and modest fines may provide insufficient deterrence. Most importantly, there is still no universal licensing, training, or education requirement. There's also a practical safety concern in enforcement itself. Stopping an inexperienced or underage rider on a small device is not the same as stopping a car. A frightened rider may panic, flee, or move suddenly into traffic. Officers must balance enforcement against the immediate danger that this encounter may create. Motorists face uncertainty as well. E-scooters are small, quiet, and difficult to detect in complex traffic environments. Their small wheels, limited stability, braking characteristics, and reduced visibility can magnify the consequences of potholes, roadway debris, sudden movements, and speed differentials. Those risks remain regardless of the regulatory framework. For the reasons, and for these reasons, I believe our association believes the clearest and most enforceable statewide standard remains a prohibition on electric scooters on public roadways. But if the General Assembly determines that prohibition is not an option, Pennsylvania should not settle for partial regulation. At a minimum, legalization should require a uniform statewide framework, not a municipality by municipality collection of rules. Every legal e-scooter should have registration or another readily identifiable identification system so officers can determine lawful establish accountability. Pennsylvania should establish a meaningful minimum operating age and require standardized rider education or safety training before roadway use. Riders should also carry appropriate liability insurance so injured parties and motorists are not left bearing financial consequences created by the uninsured operator. The Commonwealth should mandate meaningful equipment standards, including brakes, lighting, reflectors, and visibility requirements sufficient for operation around motor vehicles. Maximum speed and power specifications should be uniform, clearly defined, and resistant to circumvention through aftermarket modification. Where minors are permitted to operate, parental accountability must have real meaning. Parents or guardians who authorize, purchase, or knowingly permit unlawful operation should have defined responsibilities and consequences, not aspirational language that is difficult to enforce. Finally, penalties must be sufficient to deter dangerous conduct. Officers need clear statutory authority, predictable procedures, and tools that can be applied consistently from Philadelphia to Erie and Pittsburgh to rural Pennsylvania. They are not unreasonable barriers to mobility. They are basic components of a system that recognizes an important reality. Once motorized devices share public roadways with cars, pedestrians, bicycles, public safety cannot depend primarily on voluntary compliance. Pennsylvania should not legalize first and then try to solve the safety problems later. The measure of any micromobility law should be straightforward. Does it reduce the risk for riders, motorists, pedestrians, and police while giving officers a law they can realistically enforce? If Pennsylvania cannot answer that question with confidence, the Commonwealth should choose the clearer course, which would be prohibition. If lawmakers choose legislation instead, they should build a comprehensive safety and system first, not after another preventable tragedy. Now, I heard quickly testimony earlier, and I did have the opportunity in the past to review and assess some additional legislative proposals. I heard mentioned earlier, I believe it was Senate Bill 824, the protected bike lanes. And while protected infrastructure may improve safety for bicycles, its benefit to e-scooters is indirect and does not resolve enforcement or behavioral concerns. There's also a bill in the House, 1633, which is, I believe, the shared scooter program, reintroducing shared systems in select cities may provide more controlled environments, but also expands overall usage and does not address statewide enforcement challenges. And of course, there's been a review of the careless and reckless driving amendments, sections 3714 and 3736 of the Vehicular Code, clarifying applicability to e-bikes, which I believe is helpful, but it does not materially change the enforcement realities for e-scooters or prevent unsafe operation. So these amendments approve the bill at the margins, but did not resolve the central issue, in my humble opinion. Law enforcement still lacks a clear, consistent, and enforceable framework that ensures safety for riders, motorists, and officers alike. And I think the gaps here, respectfully, remain practical enforceability, statewide consistency, rider qualification and training, meaningful accountability, and deterrence. So from a law enforcement and public safety standpoint, the fundamental question remains unchanged. Does this framework reduce risk, or does it formalize and expand a system that remains inherently difficult to regulate and enforce? And I appreciate your time.
And thank you, all three of you gentlemen, for your testimony too. And both Senator Carney and myself are co-sponsors on the local radar. I mean, enforcement and making sure you have the tools to enforce the laws voted on in Harrisburg is obviously a top priority for us. But Senator Carney, any follow-up to that?
Thank you, all three of you, for your testimony. I think that's important for you to understand that when we first started talking about this bill, the very first people we went to were police chiefs in Delaware County and met with pretty much most of them in terms of trying to get, because we're all after the same thing, and we're all trying to make it safe for, if people are going to be using them, which they are. And I don't know how you could, if we just say, oh, they're all illegal, I don't know how you get into, then you're forcing law enforcement to confiscate these things, or it becomes like a different kind of a problem, only because there's so many. Just in the last year, just anecdotally, you can see it in your own communities that, you see so many more of these, of the micromobility stuff, the e-scooters working. We tried to craft a language, I know, in ways that would be consistent. We got a lot of pushback from municipal associations around the one-size-fits-all piece, trying to do something that's, so I think where we wound up was really trying to create a baseline, which would provide that consistency across, all the platforms. And then there's some idea that municipalities may try to make it more restrictive, which they could do, which I agree with you, becomes very difficult. I mean, I live in Delaware County, where I can't tell which municipality I'm in when I drive up Chester Pike, kind of thing, and I've only been there 30 years. Consistency is important, and understanding how these things kind of go together. I don't think we're so far apart in terms of what we're trying to do as for what you're asking for. And I'd be more than happy to sit down, to talk about how we literally get to those points where you can provide that consistency across the state, so people know about the enforceability, know at least the baseline kind of thing, how to make it work. One of the other big pushbacks we got from was the idea of registering them as vehicles, because people just talked about the bureaucratic nightmare about how difficult that would be. We don't register bicycles, for example, but we register, I'm not even sure what the term is, but as the power grows stronger and the speed grows faster and everything else, then the need for registration becomes much more important, and the like, and insurance requirements, et cetera. So it's to us, we feel like we need to make a step very soon to try to provide that kind of clarity across the Commonwealth. And if you really believe that we're not providing that with what we're talking about, then we should talk about it, and we should try to figure out what that really means. Because the difficulty with crafting any kind of laws are you're always walking a tightrope, right, between something that's too restrictive or not restrictive enough, or how we're going to make it work. But it's important that the chiefs are comfortable with it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I think, obviously the first responsibility of government is public safety, and I know the gentleman to my right, certainly that is their obligation as well. The difficulty is with knowing Pennsylvania, as I'm sure you do, just the mass number of municipalities, and I have that same problem driving through Delaware County, not knowing where I'm at. But, you know, could you imagine driving down Chester Pike or 352, you know, and having a different set of rules, you know, every half mile, 3/4 of a mile down the roadway?
Which we do right now, because several municipalities have passed, you know, their own kind of regulations about it, and they're inconsistent, and they're-
Exactly.
and it's, and I don't, and probably, anecdotally, I'd say unenforceable, because no enforcement's being done. I mean, you know, there's still a lot of e-scooters in Ridley Township, for example.
Sure, and
It's,
I think that, you know, it's part of the difficulty, plus then there's the inherent risk that must go, and I don't want to speak for the chiefs who are practitioners, you know, and you make that decision, am I going to pull this over, is it safe to pull this person over, you know, and all the variables that go with that. I actually anecdotally, on my way in, of course I was mapping my way in on my dashboard, but was on a feeder kind of a roadway onto a major highway and saw, you know, one stopped, and it was in traffic. It was in the traffic pattern. Now, the gentleman was probably, my estimate, probably in his 50s, but no tag. I'm sure the vehicle's not registered. He has no helmet on, and, you know, immediately, maybe it's just my background, you know, I was concerned when I saw him on the highway, because now he's going to pull into a major feeder, you know.
What was he riding?
Pardon me, he
He
was
was on
riding an e-bike.
An e-bike, okay.
Yeah. You know, so it's a cause for concern, you know, obviously, and, you know, maybe doing and being a little bit, and I hate to say harsh, but, you know, having some of these rules in place in advance would help law enforcement, help down the line, because then people will have to obviously at some point start to adhere to that law, and making sure that there are some guidelines that municipalities can't supersede, you know, state regulations, especially when there's, you know, they're enumerated in the vehicle code. But I think they're all going to be addressed, because I don't know where we're going to go from here. You know, they go 25 now, I guess is the max speed, you know, but, you know, now I'm hearing is the young lady that was testifying before us said, you know, that she's reading stuff about things going 50, you know, it's,
Well, we've seen that. I mean, you can buy a scooter now on Amazon that
Yeah.
can go that fast. And it's,
and parents are buying for their kids, you know?
and, well, trust me, we heard that a lot. People go, I just bought 3 of them for my kids. What, you know, it's like, you know, and they're relatively speaking, they're cheap, right? And it's, so.
I'm sorry. That's okay. I just want to say thank you again. You know, if we approach it from the engineering, enforcement, and education position, I think we can move forward. It's going to take some work, but I absolutely agree with Executive Director Bond in saying that we should do that work now. Let's not be reactive and put in a law that creates a situation where we could have, should have, right? We can do the work now, kind of diagnose scenarios, see how that would play out in the court system. I think having input from the judges would be excellent as well. You know, all the stakeholders that are here, the time is now to make sure that we're meeting the need of our fellow Pennsylvanians to get to where they need to be in a free and safe manner.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, appreciate it. We have 2 final panelists, Scott Slingerland from the Coalition of Appropriate Transportation, Lehigh Valley, and then Lee Howell from the AAA National will be joining us virtually. Scott, if you want to kick us off, I want to be mindful of the time of the LVPC as well. We're coming up on time, so please summarize your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Senator, is it Kearney or Carney? Mr. Carney, thank you for making the trip here. Thank you, Senator Miller, and your staff, Julie Carrigan, for organizing this, this hearing. My name is Scott Slingerland. I'm the Executive Director with CAT, Coalition for Appropriate Transportation. I'm a Pennsylvania State Licensed Professional Engineer, League American Bicyclist, cycling instructor, and an instructor with American Bicycling Education Association, or Cycling Savvy. I'm also a licensed driver in Pennsylvania, though I've lived in Lehigh Valley for 18 years without a car. And I brought my helmet here today to remind you that I rode my bike, to my colleagues behind me from across the state who maybe were a little far to ride their bikes here, but every day at CAT we live bicycle safety, pedestrian safety, and public transit with our programs to support, encourage, educate people in the Lehigh Valley. Every day at CAT we live the local conversation about e-bikes and e-scooters. I would say especially since around 2019 when we saw a huge rise in e-bikes and e-scooters. I'm glad the Pennsylvania legislature is taking up these issues to keep with the times. Updated legislation can bring more clarity, as mentioned, for operators of e-scooters, e-bikes, traditional bikes, as well as pedestrians and motor vehicle operators. My remarks today will be broken down into 9 major areas. I'll try to keep it moving for you, and hopefully, you know, I'll probably remind you of a lot about what you've heard, but hopefully you'll get some more ideas. These are my thoughts based on what's happening and what we see in the Lehigh Valley, and I'm not advocating for or against the legislation specifically on behalf of CAT. E-bikes can be a great way for people to enjoy transportation with movement. E-bikes can be helpful for those returning from a sedentary lifestyle, illness, or those with physical limitations. E-bikes can also provide a boost for someone to bicycle a greater distance at higher speed, replacing or reducing their dependency on cars. However, regarding e-bikes and e-scooters, the current state of laws, rider behavior, and enforcement, and I've been writing, as mentioned, it's like the Wild West out there, and you know it from what you hear, I'm sure, too. I hope I can explain today why the situation on our streets and trails is so rife with, I would say, chaotic confusion on many, many fronts. To start with, I hope you're all on board for understanding current Pennsylvania e-bike laws. I think we've even heard some different things here, but you know, they must have operable pedals and a maximum bike weight of 100 pounds. Maximum motor speed is 20 miles per hour and 750 watts. It seems like they may have a throttle. To me, the law is a little bit unclear if a throttle is allowed in Pennsylvania. A big one is that the rider must be 16 years old, and they don't require registration or insurance. And if they do all those things, and like the bucket analogy, they would follow all the same rules as a bicycle under the PA Vehicle Code. Now my first kind of big controversial area is inconsistent e-bike speed classifications, because we see many community members with e-bikes who may have purchased either in person at a bike shop or online from any number of major or off-market brands. And the issues that arise is that Pennsylvania's e-bike laws were written in 2014, which was probably way ahead of the curve. And it was actually before, as I understand, before the class system 1, 2, 3 existed, right? So kudos to Pennsylvania for being ahead of things, but now we're kind of stuck. PA's e-bike laws could be interpreted to fall under class 1 or 2, but not class 3, because that would be 28 mile an hour. And class 3 is also not legal under DCNR's state lands policy, which is nice. There's some consistency there between PennDOT and DCNR. But as already noted, maximum motor speed is 20 miles per hour, but devices can be bought that go 20, 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. These are mopeds under Pennsylvania law, and we know mopeds require registration and insurance and that kind of thing, and a license. So it's nice to have a clear line for law enforcement and for the public, and for us to help educate the public as well. Another point was briefly mentioned. It's too easy for someone to connect a USB cable to their e-bike and their computer and change the software to eliminate the maximum speed setting, right? And there's no other visible indication, as mentioned from the officers and others, is that the only way to really know if a bike is street legal is to ride it and then take it up to speed or have a special device, which can be pretty tricky. And it is too easy for someone to purchase what we're calling the e-motos or an e-scooter, which is too fast. Even if it has an indication of maximum speed, it's easy to put a sticker over. I'm not advocating for that, but I'm sure it makes life very challenging for enforcement and for the public to understand that there's no VIN number on an e-bike. There may be a serial number, but it's not standardized, and it makes it very challenging. Minimum age is 16 years old, and parents do not understand this. And we see riders that are as young as 7 or 8 years old that are riding e-bikes and e-scooters. So that's a big one, especially since younger riders don't understand the rules of the road necessarily. We're working on that with bicycles in schools and creating some awareness for young drivers. Vehicle code does not apply on trails, so it sounds like this legislation would apply mainly for roads, but we understand that all trails cross roads, so there's crosswalks or trail crossings which involve being on the street at some point and also getting to the trail and that kind of thing. Every one of our 62 municipalities in Lehigh Valley may pass their own e-bike ordinances for trails and shared use paths, and to date we know about 5 municipalities in our region that have specific e-bike laws, mostly speed limits on trails or excluding non-throttle e-bikes. And then lastly in this section, the public does not understand these laws. So we need, the need for speed is real, and human desire to go fast put riders at odds with their riding skills and other trail or road users. In my remarks, I have a section about global comparisons. I won't go much into that, although we note that in Europe, the speed limit for regular e-bikes, which are called pedelecs, the maximum speed is 15.5 miles per hour. And then beyond that, is a speed pedelec, which goes up to 28 miles per hour. But if we're looking at any kind of data about what's going on in Europe for e-bikes, we have to remember that there's different speed limits. A moment on equipment challenges for e-bikes, potential for battery fires, specifically if e-bikes are not UL approved. Some users lose their charger, and then they buy a new charger, which is not compatible. They overheat the they plug it in, and the only thing that manufacturers can do to prevent this is just to remind people that if they're charging it, don't go to sleep, don't leave the house. If it gets hot, take it off the charger. So how would someone know if their battery was damaged in a crash and that could potentially lead to a fire? There's a lot of challenges. Furthermore, in parts for e-bikes, we see a lot of users that their brakes don't work, or that, those are kind of standard parts, but the electronic things, the controllers, the motors, they're not standardized. So for anybody to fix their e-bike is very challenging in a lot of cases. They end up throwing it away as well. Lastly, in this area, bike shops often refuse to repair e-bikes that are not street legal for their own liability reasons. And in this case, people are literally riding around and they can't get their e-bike fixed, and they have no brakes, and they're literally dragging their feet to stop on bikes that are basically mopeds, right? On safety and crash data, we'll go back to our police departments. We, as CAT, we access the Pennsylvania Crash Information Tool, which is an amazing tool from PennDOT. Sorry they left, but it gives us a lot of insight into crashes on the streets, and we can look at 25 years worth of data for crashes, right? The only limitation is that the PSIT tool does not include any checkbox for e-bikes. So we're basically blind in terms of what the crash data is showing us, what trends that we can't see, because there's no e-bike data in PSIT that's available to the public. So it would be great if we could improve that. A note on the publication 153 from PennDOT is the Police Crash Report Manual. It now includes a checkbox for e-bikes. I'm sure our officers are looking at that. However, how would they know if the e-bike is street legal, if it's an e-moto, if it's whatever it is? And that's feeding the data that we're supposed to go by to understand safety. And I understand the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, they look at reportable crash data from PennDOT. So if we're to know what's going on, we need good data. On the other side, hospital networks. We have 2 big hospital networks in Lehigh Valley, St. Luke's and Jefferson, or Lehigh Valley Health Network. They also do not have very good data on ER admissions. Knowing if I fall off my bike and I get hurt, the chances are I go to the ER and I don't have a police report if it happens on a trail or if it's a solo crash, if it's not serious. But we would like to see better data locally in Pennsylvania and the Lehigh Valley to understand the trends that can help us educate the public on what what we need to do to make things safer on the streets and the trails. All right. Now a big idea for y'all, okay? Driver's licensing and continuing education, which I saw in the bill, Senate Bill 1008, includes a driver's license question. And we know that, I should have brought it with me, that if you go to the driver's license center, they have a nice manual for new drivers. It's about 100 pages, and on page 98, or somewhere in there, there's a couple great pages on bicycles and micromobility, and there's some good stuff on pedestrians too. However, these manuals are mostly read by 16-year-olds, new drivers, and the challenges we see on the street are often not from new drivers. If as a bicyclist, personally, a lot of animosity would come from older drivers, not older, but just older than 16. And that comes from confusion about understanding a bicyclist's place on the road, pedestrian yield laws. If someone's driving for 20, 30, 40, 60 years, and they haven't renewed, or they renew their driver's license, they send in $40 every 4 years, there's no requirement for them to understand new traffic laws, right? There's no direct contact. Maybe PennDOT does billboards and social media, which are great, but for people who don't seek out social media and billboards, can we introduce something of a continuing education requirement for motor vehicle drivers? We see every other state license, whether engineering, cosmetology, esthetician, funeral directing, law, everybody has CEUs that you do every 3 years, 20, 30 hours. If there was something that were not very onerous, like watching a 5-minute video from PennDOT when you renew online or at the driver's license center, we could introduce high-priority safety topics like work zones, emergency vehicle yield laws, aggressive driving, and then things on vulnerable road users. I don't know, just an idea. And this bill includes a provision that goes a little bit into that. We brought it up with PPAC, the Pedestrian Pedocycle Advisory Committee. I don't speak for them, but just trying to get more accurate information to drivers may reduce conflicts on the streets and improve understanding. A couple more topics here. I'll keep it brief, but I've ridden e-scooters a few times, and I admit they're decidedly compact and convenient in their nature. Someone who lives on a second-floor apartment can much more easily carry their e-scooter up a flight of stairs than an e-bike. Like an 80-pound e-bike, nobody is carrying up a flight of stairs, right? So e-scooters can be more convenient, I can understand. The police chiefs mentioned that the smaller wheels and I would say the vertical steering axis of scooters makes them a little tricky or twitchy when you ride them, and I'm sure riders get very good at them, but road hazards like potholes can be a source of a crash or hazards for e-scooters. I saw also Senate Bill 1009 is for, it looked like it was for e-scooters on a public level, like a scooter share basis, limiting them to 15 miles an hour. But we were talking a lot about speed. Everybody's talking about speed today. And we've come up with a saying that summarizes some of traffic mentality. And I would say it's not how fast you can go, but how fast you should go. Think about it. If somebody driving their car 40 miles an hour through a neighborhood is probably not prudent. And likewise, somebody riding their e-bike, e-scooter, or traditional bike on a trail that's 6 feet wide. Some of our multi-use trails are 6 feet wide, which is the width of my fingertips. And if you're passing a pedestrian with a dog or a young kid on a 6-foot wide path, and on one side it drops to the canal, the other side it drops to the river, then what's a reasonable speed to pass them? I would argue it's 6 to 10 miles an hour is walking speed, and with communication, with awareness. So in every situation, as well as riding an e-scooter, e-bike, or a bike on the street, if there's a line of parked cars, I don't think it would be prudent to pass them, right? A separated bike lane, that's one thing with awareness, but we always have to be aware of our situations. And if I'm able to pass a line of traffic at 20 miles an hour on the left or the right, then it could create a very big hazard. And I did a little math, just as an engineer, to remind you of my duty as an engineer, about speed and its relation to kinetic energy. From 15 to 20 miles an hour is a 33% increase in speed. Yeah, do we agree? 33% increase in speed from 15 to 20. The kinetic energy increase is 78%, just from 15 to 20 miles an hour. So to think about potential for collisions and conflicts, we have to think about speed and what's reasonable in a given situation. And a side note, looking at bike lane designs, they're often designed for 15 miles an hour, which I feel like is behind the times, personally speaking, especially with e-mobility. And lastly, other behavior we see, e-bike riders, we want them, I think everybody should practice bike handling. If you're riding any kind of mobility device, you need to understand the dynamics and understand, especially e-bikes have potential for making tight maneuvers and accelerating unexpectedly for the rider themselves as a risk. Obeying traffic control devices, stopping at stop signs and red lights, riding the same direction as traffic, using the lane for the destination. Like, if I'm making a left turn, I don't want to make it from the right curb, right? So just being predictable in that regard. And these things can go a long way to prevent intersection crashes. Sidewalks, especially are designed, sidewalks and crosswalks are for pedestrians. They're for walking and wheelchairs. 20 miles an hour is too fast on a sidewalk. That's already covered under vehicle code, right? That riding a bicycle in a business district on the sidewalk is illegal. In other cases, it's a judgment call, right? Depending on pedestrian volume and whatnot. A helmet is helpful. Headlights, taillights at night. Thank you, Senator Carney, for mentioning putting this in the bill. And lastly, the unspoken thing is communication, right? So we communicate as bicyclists with lane position and signals, working to get along with motorists because we want to signal our intentions and create diplomacy on the streets and not animosity or separate, ignoring each other kind of situations. Car drivers should be patient to pass with care by changing lanes and giving 4 feet passing clearance, which we've had since 2012. And cars should not pass a bicyclist when there is oncoming traffic. Right? Makes sense. And we are following very closely the other legislation, radar for local law enforcement, because speed enforcement can benefit everyone's safety, not just vulnerable road users, but especially vulnerable. Automated speed enforcement, I don't think there's a bill right now, other than it looks like in Philly, like work zones and Roosevelt Avenue. Automated speed enforcement, I don't know where the police fall in that, but it could go a long way to encouraging drivers kindly or incentivizing them not to get a ticket. And yeah, that goes also for automated red light enforcement, which is only, looks like Pennsylvania first-class cities. So that could be a big one too. And finally, the Park and Protected Bike Lane Bill, Senate Bill 824, we are following closely. It could go a long way for the infrastructure changes that are sought by municipalities in our region. And noting that it seems in this year's version of the Park and Protected Bike Lane Bill, there's a clause that says there's mandatory use of available pedestrian path, which means that a bicycle rider is required to use a bike lane when there is one, based on the current draft of the bill. However, personally, I don't agree with that because it puts the responsibility on the bike rider to prove that they're doing something that's very basic, like making a left turn from a bike lane does not make sense. Avoiding a pothole or a parked car in the bike lane is inevitable, and there are times when a bike rider might not be in the bike lane for different reasons, but we do appreciate the rest of the bill for the efforts. So, and that's all I have for you. Thank you for listening to my remarks.
Thank you, Scott. Senator Carney, any follow-up questions?
No, thank you for your testimony. Great stuff. I don't think we're in disagreement.
Well, on myself. Thank you.
We're coming up on 12 o'clock here. Lee Howell is joining us virtually. Lee, if you have a couple minutes, you could summarize your testimony. We do have your written testimony and fact sheet in front of us. Lee, I see your camera's on, but you're muted. Okay. Lee, you're still muted.
All right, thank you, sorry for the technical problems. Members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Lee Howell, and I am the Manager of State Relations for AAA National. Micromobility use is expanding, and communities are increasingly confronted with the question of how these devices will safely fit into their transportation system. E-bikes and e-scooters are increasingly being used for recreation, commuting, neighborhood travel, and connecting riders to transit. And as these devices provide important benefits such as transportation choices, connections to transit, and more sustainable alternatives to shorter trips. However, with them comes new safety challenges. The AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety recently completed a project entitled Safety of Micromobility, Regulations, Data, and Stakeholders. Within this study, they reviewed existing research, scanned federal, state, and local regulations, provided an analysis linking Tennessee crash and hospital records, and had focus groups and interviews with public agencies, industry representatives, safety advocates, and other stakeholders. And in this study, they found several recurring themes that would help states provide safety for these devices. And today I want to just touch on 5 of them. The first is that we need better data to drive better safety policies. One of the clearest findings of the Foundation's work is that policymakers often lack the complete picture of micromobility injuries and crashes. Traditional police databases disproportionately capture crashes involving motor vehicles and often miss falls, single device crashes, or other incidents that do not involve a motor vehicle. Many micromobility injuries occur when riders strike potholes, hit uneven pavement, lose control, or experience equipment failures. And many of these incidents result in medical treatment but are not captured correctly identified in traditional police databases. And as a result, safety trends can remain hidden and data required to evaluate potential safety measures or safety countermeasures is unavailable. The Foundation's research suggests that linking transportation crash data with healthcare inventory information can provide a much more accurate picture of the problem, and that they do a case study of Tennessee where they do link this and uncover incidents and injuries that otherwise would not have been found. And this is kind of an approach that other states may wish to examine. In conclusion, if we want better outcomes, we need better data. The second is that consistency matters. One challenge repeatedly identified by researchers and stakeholders is the lack of consistent classifications for micromobility devices. Not all e-bikes are the same. Some are pedal assistance only, others include throttles, maximum speeds vary substantially between devices, and many can be modified after their purchase to exceed their original design specification. Yet these differences, similar devices are frequently categorized differently by consumers, law enforcement agencies, hospitals, or even crash reporting systems. Researchers found that micromobility devices are often miscoded as bicycles, pedestrians, mopeds, motorcycles, or another vehicle type altogether. This inconsistency undermines crash analysis, complicates enforcement, and makes it more difficult to develop effective safety policy. The research supports clearer and more consistent classifications while also recognizing that high-speed and modified out-of-class devices increasingly fall outside the traditional 3-class e-bike framework that many states have already introduced. Third, education is essential as devices become faster and more powerful. Another recurring theme from stakeholders is that consumers may not fully understand the capabilities of modern micromobility devices. Today's e-bikes and e-scooters may resemble traditional bicycles and scooters. Parents will purchase these for their child, but they may not realize that some models are capable of speeds well above those associated with conventional bicycles. Similarly, riders may not understand the applicable restrictions, operating characteristics, or safe riding practices for the device they are on. The research raises particular concerns about high-speed and out-of-class devices, including vehicles that exceed legal e-bike classifications or may have been modified after purchase. At the same time, the ability to modify existing devices creates additional enforcement and safety challenges, because that device may no longer fit in the classifications. This is why public education remains critical. Riders must understand the capability of their devices. Parents should understand what they are purchasing for their children. Consumers should understand the importance of visibility, helmet use, and safe riding behavior. Education is one of the most effective and least controversial tools available to improve safety outcomes. Fourth, head injury prevention must remain a priority. Among the most serious injuries associated with micromobility crashes are traumatic brain injuries and head impact. Research reviewed in connection with this work has found very low helmet use rates in some micromobility settings. Some studies show as below 10% helmet use, despite substantial safety benefits. Researchers also found that helmet laws can reduce injury severity among riders in crashes. At the same time, experts noted that helmets originally designed for traditional bicycles may not always reflect the forces associated with higher speed e-bikes and e-scooters. Continued research into helmet performance and standards may therefore become increasingly important as device technology evolves. AAA believes that promoting helmet use, particularly among younger riders, represents a significant opportunity to reduce severe injury and save lives. And fifth and finally, infrastructure is often the deciding factor. One of the report's clearest findings is that infrastructure strongly influences micromobility safety. The report concludes that micromobility safety improves when riders are separated from mixed motor vehicle traffic and provided with physically protected space appropriate to device speed and operating characteristics. Research also identified roadway maintenance as a frequently overlooked contributor to crashes and injuries. Small wheel devices are particularly vulnerable to potholes, debris, uneven pavement, cracked surfaces, or obstructed bike lanes. The data also highlights nighttime visibility as an increasing concern. The broader research indicates that nighttime conditions, inadequate roadway lighting, and inconsistent device lighting can increase crash risk and injury severity. Researchers found that improvements in roadway illumination, reflective treatment, and device lighting may reduce crash risk and improve visibility. In conclusion, micromobility is here to stay. The question before policymakers is how we integrate these devices safely into the transportation system that was largely designed before their emergence. The AAA Foundation's report points to several evidence-based principles that can help guide the efforts. Improve data collection by linking crash and healthcare records, adopt clear and consistent classifications for micromobility devices, expand public education and rider awareness, encourage helmet use and support further helmet safety research, and invest in infrastructure maintenance, visibility improvements, and roadway safety design. Taken together, these strategies offer a balanced path forward. They protect riders, improve accountability, enhance policymaking, and preserve the many mobility benefits that micromobility provides. And thank you again for the ability to testify today.
Thank you, Lee. Senator Carney, any follow-up questions or closing remarks?
I don't have any questions. There's a lot of preaching to the choir here, which is good stuff. I do have a couple comments. I wanted to thank you, Senator Miller, and thank all our testifiers for their insight into micromobility issues in Pennsylvania. Clearly, the legislature has lots of work to do to put us in a better track here. I'm eager to get our legislation moving instead of languishing in committee. In order for that to happen, it's going to require more municipalities, more families, more stakeholders reaching out to their legislators and urging them to stop stalling and take action. And that's legislators on both sides of the aisle. We don't need legislation to raise awareness and educate our communities about the existing law and best practicing for safety. We just need communication on that. Remember, e-scooters are not street legal and are certainly not appropriate for children. Stand strong against peer pressure or other factors that might lead you to letting your children ride e-scooters or e-bikes. E-bikes are prohibited if you're under 16 years old. Helmets and reflective gear are essential, whether you're on a bicycle or an e-scooter. And no one should have more people on a micromobility device than what they're originally designed for. Riding on pegs or on handlebars is extremely dangerous, even without any cars on the road. So whether you're driving a car or when you're driving a car, please keep an eye out for cyclists, pedestrians, and other road users. We really do need to share the road. Even more than our dedicated law enforcement partners, it's family members who keep each other safe. And no state law can replace the need for making good choices while you're using the road or while you're choosing how to use the road. Safety is everyone's responsibility. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carney. And I want to thank all of our testifiers for the feedback and testimony. I want to thank our host, the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, Senator Carney as a co-host, Julie Kerrigan, my staff member that helped set up the testifiers today. This was recorded. It will be posted at pasenatormiller.com/policy. If there's any additional feedback, please share it. And that concludes today's hearing. Thank you very much.